So as you mentioned, my name is Patrick. I head up product management at Twilio. I've been at the company now for well over 5 years. So I joined in 2011. And what I'm going to be talking about today is scaling up the product engineering team at Twilio and some of the challenges that we encounter as we do that, and what we've done to overcome that. So first, I'll just sort of walk through how we've scaled. So this was Twilio probably about 6 months after I joined. On that floating hat sitting in the back there. A few years later, we were about this size. A few years later, that's me in the back again. A few years later, we were this size. And most recently, we're this size. So we've gone from, it was about under 20, I think a little over a dozen in product engineering when I joined, to now 350 employees in product engineering. So the focus of today is to talk about what sort of problems we encountered along the way, our approach to addressing them, and what we were able to do there. The one thing I'll sort of caveat this is the lessons that we've learned, and this is what has worked for Twilio, but every one of your companies is very, very different. Every one of your products is very, very different, and so what worked for us may not work for others, and so I'd always sort of caveat that, sharing the lessons learned, but for everyone you need to sort of chart your own path and figure out how it works for you. First, what is a Twilio? So I don't know how many here know about Twilio? Oh, okay, good. Then I will not spend too much time here. The way I always describe Twilio, you may not know what Twilio is, but you've probably used Twilio, and you very well may have used Twilio today. So Twilio is a cloud communications platform that powers many applications and services that are out there. So when you look at our customer base, we now have over 90,000 paying customers. And if you're getting an alert or a notification, if you're calling a contact center, many times you're going through Twilio's platform. Really, the way we sort of describe what Twilio is, it's not an application, but we sort of describe it as the third era of software, a new era, where you had sort of on-prem monolithic applications that evolved into line of business software subscription services that you were selling to a business buyer, and now you have cloud platforms, right? Things like DigitalOcean, AWS, and Twilio. So, as I mentioned, we are a cloud communication platform for voice, messaging, video, and authentication. It sounds like most of you know who Twilio is. Just a few stats about Twilio and our services. Just back here, there's over 1 million developers on the platform, over 75 billion API requests, 90,000 paying customers, and about 500,000 apps built on the platform. To date, we have 15 different discrete products. Over hundreds of APIs. We have over 600 or so internal microservices that power what customers see as Twilio today. There's about 60 different small agile product teams that I'll talk about. We're doing about 30-some deploys a day, and we're shipping new features to our customers at the very least once a week. So there's a lot of folks that are actively working on powering these services. So at Twilio, we have sort of two base units of scale in our product engineering organization. These are small, agile teams and the microservices architecture. So I'm not actually going to talk about microservices architecture. We just had a talk on that. I'm going to actually talk about the teams and how those teams function and what are some of the challenges we run into the teams. So first, a few principles of our teams. So our teams are customer-focused. They are autonomous. And by autonomous, we mean they are empowered to make decisions themselves. They're able to ship and deploy independently. They're able to make the decisions that best optimize for the customers that their service is intended to serve. They're operationally focused, so every one of our teams includes the team operations. They both build and run those services in production, so they are all carrying around pagers for their services. They are metrics driven. We tell all of our teams, measure everything. We really focus on measuring and monitoring our services, and then we ship iteratively. So this is not like a wait 3 months and then do a deployment. All this stuff is probably familiar for everyone in the room. So what's in a team, and how do we define a team at Twilio? I mentioned there are 60 some of these teams. So team, it's sort of got an identity. Each of our teams has a team name. It has a mission and a mandate, right? So the team will have some mission, some mandate, some problem that it's solving for some set of customers. Sometimes those are external customers. Sometimes those are internal customers. But each team has a clear mission, a clear mandate, and a clear customer. And the team's composed usually of about 5 to 8 engineers, and has a product manager, an engineering manager, and a tech lead. Product manager is usually we say is responsible for the what and why around what the team is working on. The engineering manager is responsible for how and when, more delivery focused, and then the tech lead is really responsible for the code quality and the architecture for that team. So scaling those teams. So I first showed this image here. There are about 2 engineering teams in this image, and fast forward to 2013, where you have now quite a few more folks on the team. And one of the first set of problems that we started encountering as the organization was growing, we were continuing to hiring, is you see these type of things creep in with each and every one of the teams. There's so many meetings going on. This becomes a constant complaint. You see, it takes forever to decide stuff. That one will come up quite frequently. Why are so many people involved in this decision? Like, no one knows who's supposed to be involved, who isn't, who's the actual decider. Usually becomes less clear. And daily stand-up leaves my legs tired, right? So, your 10-minute stand-up is now an hour, and there's 20 people in it. And so this is sort of the symptoms that you probably need to think about, splitting and evolving your teams. So when do you know to split, and how do you split that work is sort of one of the very first problems you run into in scaling the teams. So the way that we do this at Twilio is we split based on an evolution of those services. So if we have a set of services that the team is responsible for running, what we'll do is basically specialize the 2 resulting teams. We'll separate the backlog, have 2 independent backlogs, and then we'll actually split the service operations as well. So, if you had this team that we called in 2013 Voice, it was 20 engineers. In 2014, you now had 2 teams, one called Voice Services and one called Voice Connectivity, and you've split the responsibilities. You've taken half the services given to one team, half the services given to another, and you've also split the people in the backlogs around those services. And then again, as you add more features, as you add more people, you now have, in 2015, this is a 50, 60 person organization, and now you have on your voice services, we have a special team just on recordings, right? So that's a fully staffed team, a team focused just on our conferencing capabilities, right? And you're taking the same services, breaking them apart, and then handing them to each of the different teams. And then once again, same principles apply. Autonomous, independent service ownership, able to release independently, and customer focused each and every time you do one of those splits of the monolith. So that's how we've sort of grown, and that's sort of one way in which you grow your teams. You just sort of evolve them over time and continue to split. And I would highly encourage you to not make some of the mistakes we've made where we decided, yeah, we're going to split backlogs but not services. Doesn't work. You run into all sorts of different problems if you do that. If you split services but not backlogs, your stand-up is still 20 minutes, and you still end up with a lot of these same problems. So this is sort of the first way, more specialization in evolving the organization. So next thing is, the next challenge you have as the organization is trying to do more things. So this model, I just talked about, evolution and specialization. That's good for scaling the number of people working on a given problem, but doesn't necessarily help you when you want to start something completely new. And what you'll find is, as the organization is trying to do things new, and this sort of volume growth of Twilio transactions from 2011 to 2013 to 2015. We haven't completed the chart for 2016, but you've scaled these services quite a bit over the last 5 years that I've been there. And as you go to teams and say, hey, we want to go ahead and try and do something new, this is something that sort of comes back from your team. It's like, well, we can't make progress on that because like we're scaling this thing, right? Like the product was successful. We're just trying to keep the lights on here, and you'll see this frequently occur with your teams. And really, it's true that the teams are doing a ton of work. They're moving at a million miles an hour just to keep the lights on, just to continue to scale the services that you've already built and you're already selling to your customers. And so what we've done in these situations is we try and sort of tackle those new problems and figure out how we execute on multiple things at once. We do that with an experimental new team. So it's the same team model, but we create a new team for this. So where the one way of sort of growing the organization you would evolve a service, you'd split it into 2 different teams. The other way you do it, especially when you want to try and do something net new, is you start with a brand new team. There are some challenges doing this. Usually you start with someone that is like a single engineer. They wear every single hat possible. They're the product manager of the thing. They're the engineering manager. They're the technical lead. You take someone that's experienced in your existing systems and you sort of seed that new team. You have them wear a ton of different hats. And whatever that new thing is, it may become successful, and then you sort of grow and hire a full team out of whatever that was. Or it isn't successful, and you take some of the learnings there, you recycle them back, and you take folks and have them go tackle new problems within your organization. We measure these teams very, very differently. Where the other teams, there's clear business metrics, there's a product that you're scaling. These teams, you're trying something new, and so we try and measure these teams based on what they're learning, and we call them experiments for a reason. We're sort of throwing them out there to try and learn something new, to see if we can launch a new product, or if there's a need to try and solve a new customer problem. We'll throw the teams out there and see what happens, and not all of them will be successful. Whereas that evolution path I showed earlier, like it's usually from a very, very clear need, right? And that's allowed us actually to go from what was in 2008 one product, just Twilio Voice, to now the sort of 15 products that you see today. We would just sort of take one engineer, send them off, and try one new thing out. If it was successful, we got traction, then we'd go build a team around them and go from there. So now you have a lot of these small independent teams, right? We keep splitting things. We keep sort of starting new initiatives. One of the next problems that creeps in is around dependency management. And this creeps in usually around this size, right? Where you now have these isolated teams. Some of them are building software in a completely different region. You're not able to talk one another and resolve things. Hey, can you take care of this? And you start running into sort of dependency management problems. And teams will start saying things like, well, we can't deliver on this because we're waiting on this other team and they don't care about this feature. And this is just sort of one of those natural problems that happens as you continue to grow your engineering organization. And so the way we try and address this is, so how do we avoid these bottlenecks internally? So the way we try and do this is with self-service platforms. So Twilio itself is a self-service communications platform. We design all of our internal systems as self-service internal platforms as well. We have a thing we say to all of our teams is that we prefer APIs over meetings, and we say we prefer well-defined software interfaces over coordinated planning. And that was sort of controversial when we've told this to other parts of the company. You're going into the sales organization, it's like, no, we're not trying to, all be aligned here. Like, that's actually not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create self-service platforms. We want to document them. We want anybody to be able to use our internal platforms just like our customers can use our product as a platform. And that allows you to actually move a lot faster. And a lot of this dependency management and coordination that was creeping in, you just say like, no, if you're delivering a service to the company, it needs to be self-service. It needs to be well documented. Anybody in the company needs to be able to adopt that service. So we sort of have the same attributes with our external-facing product. We do that internally as well. One of the really actually neat things for a developer product like ours is if you do this internally, sometimes you realize what you had built is actually a really neat product for your customers too. So on more than one occasion, we've built some internal abstraction, self-service API to enable our teams to move faster. And then we sort of sat down and said, great, let's productize this. Like if we had this pain internally, probably our customers have similar pains, and this could potentially solve a problem for our customers as well. And I love this quote. This is something we emphasize with our teams quite a bit. So this is from Bezos. I'm emphasizing the self-service nature of these platforms because it's important for a reason I think that's somewhat non-obvious. Even well-meaning gatekeepers slow innovation. When a platform is self-service, even the improbable ideas can get tried because there's no expert gatekeeper saying that will never work. And guess what? Many of those improbable ideas do work, and society is the beneficiary of that diversity. I really, really love this quote. Twilio has a really, really strong culture, and so what we found was we had plenty of folks that were well-meaning gatekeepers, right? That had creeped in the organization, and they wanted to help every team possible, but they had some service that everyone depended on, and they had to go through 5 different steps to get a product out the door. And they were well-meaning gatekeepers. You'll see that probably more than you see like the malicious gatekeeping that you might see in a more bureaucratic organization. In your startup, you end up with well-meaning gatekeepers, people that want to make things happen for the other teams, but they are accidentally hindering the entire organization. And so you have to sort of sit down with the teams and say, hey, I realize you're providing the service, and your role changed. You may have been full service before, and you just solved this problem for everyone in the organization. Now you need to build a self-service platform that solves this problem via APIs. And it's something that certainly we spend a lot of time with today at Twilio. Even our account portal today now at Twilio, our account portal, our Twilio console, used to be a service organization. Now it's actually a platform. So teams basically now, all the independent product teams, they stand up their own UI, but there's a platform team that delivers them React components and an auth layer, and they're effectively like an HTTP proxy for downstream UI teams as well. So we've driven as much as we can that to the teams the autonomy to deliver their product lines with platforms in front of each of those different teams. So now you've got really good self-service platforms, you've got independent autonomous teams, you've got a lot of different experiments going on. The next problem that happens is product and service consistency, right? So you've created this organization that can do a lot of things in parallel without talking to one another, and that actually creates a whole different class. Everybody wants to invent their own way to do authentication. Everybody wants to do things different their own way, and you'll hear this, right? We know everyone else in the organization does it that way, but we want to do it this way, right? And this way is definitely better than however else everyone else in the organization has been doing it. And so, how do you address this, right? This is a good outcome in terms of allowing you to do many different things at once, but it can create complete chaos if it's not managed well and you don't put the processes in place. And so for this, it's usually around this size. This is Twilio more recently. You got to start developing more organizational standards and practices, and so you allow teams to move independently, but you do set a set of standards and norms that any team needs to deliver to in terms of what they're building. So this helps ensure consistency, and consistency is really, really important, right? Even though we're 60 independent small teams at Twilio, from our customer standpoint, we're Twilio, right? And so they expect a certain level of service performance. They expect the same level of security across every service that they're using, right? They don't expect the fact that we're 60 different teams all running at different speeds. They expect one product, one brand, one vendor to trust, and we need to be able to guarantee that to our customers. So this is where organizational standards come into place. So we want to do this once again. We don't want to create gatekeepers. That's not. We don't think that builds a long-term agile organization. But you have to have standards. So documented, well-understood standards that have automation to see if a team is complying with a standard or not. Right. That's what we're doing. And we have standards around a variety of different domains. So security, obviously, we call it the Twilio Cloud Security Standard. Teams need to be compliant with this standard, and it will tell them around what they can log, what they can't log, how their services can talk to other services, and how they secure each of their services. It outlines exactly what those teams need to be doing, and every team needs to comply with these standards. And then we have automation that tests it. We also have build and test standards for each and every one of the teams. We have operational standards for each and every one of those teams. We've introduced, even in Twilio products today, you can see a designation on every service. It says dev preview, beta, or it's generally available. And that depends on how far you are against these operational maturity model. Right? We will not make a service GA if a team has not completed everything in the operational maturity model. And so we're not telling teams, no, you can't ship, you can't get this in front of customers, you can't learn, because we think that's really, really critical. But what we're saying is Twilio is going to put a different stamp on this product if it's at a different stage in its life cycle, because you can't compare a product that has had 9 years to mature, 8 years to mature, to one that was built just this past year. And then we actually communicate the status of those products to every one of our customers, right? So hey, it's in dev preview. You click on a link inside the console of Twilio, and it will tell you, hey, this is what a dev preview product means, and this is what you should expect. We say, don't put our dev preview products in your production environment. That's not our recommendation, because we haven't completed all of these, the entire operational maturity model there. And then beta, we said, you can put it in your production environment, but there may still be changes coming, right? So do so with caution. And we're very, very clear about what customers should expect and where our teams are with respect to these standards. So just in summary, and then I'll open it up for questions. Small teams, independent execution, and dedicated teams, so you can do new initiatives. Self-service platforms internally, as well as if your product is a dev platform like ours, that's the thing our customers get. We treat our internal platform the same way. And then finally, organizational standards and processes and norms around delivery, security, and operations that are clear, specified, and ideally auditable with software, so that you can know if a team's complied with those services.
Thanks a lot. Those quotes sounded so familiar. I really loved those. Questions?
So in this journey of scaling the engineering team from just a few people to this massive team, so I was wondering if you guys at any point in time had the monolith that you had to break down to the microservices, and how the transition and the transformation of the teams happened to get this to work, like the reverse Conway maneuver kind of thing. So because this is a challenge we're currently having, and it's really, so we know the end result of the small autonomous teams, and we know how you have this hybrid team of everyone doing everything on the same monolith. How do you get from point A to point B?
Yeah. So I'll show you, actually, I showed you that example of our voice product, and I'll talk about it a little bit more if I can get all the way back there. So one of the things I'd say is you should be thinking about what component you break apart first. And do not try and break the whole thing apart at once. It's never going to work. What you want to do is take one very specific piece of functionality, break that apart. And it may mean that when you split your teams, it's not a 50-50 split. It's like a 95-5. But that's okay. You staff it accordingly. Let's see here. It was yeah. So when we made this split, what we said, that voice service is a giant monolith built by the founding team, and we split this thing into what we call voice services and voice connectivity. Basically, what we did was we just split off the connectivity layer of our voice platform, the thing that talks to every carrier around the globe. It was the 5%. We split that apart, and then we still had the other 95 sitting here. And then we did it again, right? So now we had 95. We said first we're going to split off recordings. It's another 5%. Now we got 90 sitting in this thing we called voice services. And then we split conferencing off. And then so you want to make sure you're splitting the smallest unit of increment that you can split, and don't try and break the whole thing up at once. You'll struggle.
And every time you split something off, you build the team around that, or not necessarily?
Every time we split things off, we generally will, in the fullness of time, staff a team around it. Sometimes it's like one engineer, right? So it's not a team, and you don't want to put them on an island. So what you may even do is you may run this as one team, but now running multiple different microservices. So I mentioned there's 600 some microservices. Teams are running many of those because we know at some point in the future, we expect this is actually maybe going to be an entire team. I would caution, though, prematurely splitting things into microservices. There's some overhead. It's not free. It's a pretty, from a people standpoint, it can be very inefficient. But you want to do it so you decouple how your organization is able to execute.
More questions?
Freedom of choice in languages or API styles and so on to the teams, or do you value consistency higher than autonomy there?
So early days, we gave teams complete. Yeah, so the question was around freedom of language choice. Our teams, they're autonomous. Are they able to choose whatever language they want? So early days was completely, everybody choose whatever you want. Our web stack is in PHP, but the backend voice services are in Java. Some teams wanted to go do Scala. So that was our philosophy initially. that creates way more work when you become 350 person organization. So now it's a little bit different. We've changed the way we allow teams. So you can choose your own language, but you need a good reason for doing so, not just because you're interested in Haskell. We've built a lot of tooling that makes it really easy to do services on the JVM at Twilio. We've made it very, very easy to do services using a few. We have a whole sort of service model that's been delivered by our infrastructure teams, and if you have a good reason, you can do so using whatever language you want. There are some things actually in C++ around our media engines because they need to be. But in general, you should be using the JVM at Twilio as the guidance for teams, unless you have a good reason not to.
More questions?
Yeah, so who sets the standards? So we have a cloud security team that is setting the security standards. We also have an architecture team. So this is something we developed later on, which is sort of almost sits outside of the R&D management structure. So I had a product, there's a VP engineering. Our architecture team, they get to sort of sit off to the side, and they report into our VP eng. There's a product architect that reports into me, but we sort of let them operate independently, and they're the ones sort of looking at the common problems across all of our teams, the failure modes that every team is sort of reinventing the wheel on, and they set those standards across the organization. But then, and ideally, they build automation that enforces those standards too. On occasion, some things you can't automate, then the management team will try and enforce.
How do you balance overall strategies with the individual teams or with the goals of the individual teams? Or is it completely disconnected in a way? How do you keep consistency in that regard?
Yeah, so that's probably more of a planning, sort of a annual planning process, or whatever your planning cadence is. How do you sort of manage the top down? This is where Twilio wants to go, with the bottom up of the teams this is what's on fire, or this is where I think we should go. So what we do actually every year, and you can do it at any point in time, but we have a planning cycle. We actually write these 6-page sort of business plans, and anybody at the company can write them on any topic that they want. And we have an entire review process where those 6-page written documents get reviewed. And if someone has a good idea, they hand it to their manager hands it to another manager in the organization. And we basically want to encourage teams to come up with their own ideas and do this sort of bottoms-up planning. And then we blend the top-down is more around not specific features or things we're going to deliver. It's around hey, we need to double the size of the organization. We need to grow revenue this way. And then ideally what happens is the plans basically give a discrete way in which you achieve that top-level company-wide objective. So that's sort of how we're doing it. It's not perfect yet, but the idea is sort of some blend of top-down and bottom-up. The second thing we do is we do 2 weeks out of the year is something we call tweak. Where basically we put almost no constraints on the teams. They basically can self-assemble into new teams to tackle a problem that moves the needle for our customers. And anybody in the company is invited to participate and tweak. And so we just sort of give the engineering teams free reign to build whatever they've been sort of thinking they wanted to build about 2 weeks out of the year that isn't in the product roadmap and isn't in sort of the standard processes. And you get a ton of innovation that comes out of that, right? Folks saying, hey, I've always wanted to do this. They got a week to go spend time and do it.
How do you evaluate performance of people or teams?
Yeah, so the way that, I don't think we have this perfect just yet. We have a weekly operational review meeting with every single team. There's now 60-some teams, so it's tricky. And basically they have to define a service health metrics, and they need to instrument their services to ensure that they can actually measure the thing they define as their SLA. And then we'll actually come in and look at every team's service health metrics week over week. And we do it at a weekly cadence. We started off, it was quarterly, but quarterly is way too long to realize a team is going down the wrong path, and they're missing their SLA. By the time you realize that the team's not been performing well, it's far too late. So we do it weekly, and we actually spin a giant wheel at the start of the week, and they have to present their service performance metrics to all the other product and engineering leaders in the company.
That's operational performance, or also business performance, like conversion rate, things
We do both. So we have, once a week, it's a 2-hour meeting. The first hour is the engineers showing operational performance metrics. And then the second hour is the product managers. And the product managers come in, funnel, conversion, and both stick around. So engineering is optional for the second hour. Product is optional for the first hour. But most PMs and EMs stick around for both of those.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.